Chapter 1. Blake awoke, his heart pounding in his chest. His hand automatically squeezed the grip of the pistol under his pillow. Sitting up, he took deep, slow breaths to slow his heart rate. Glancing at his watch, he dragged his tired legs off the bed. It was time. Blake placed the pistol on the bedside table and ran a hand over his tired face. The stubble tickled his palm as he scratched at his scarred chin. The trained killer was annoyed with himself for falling asleep for 4 hours. He usually only allowed himself a 20-minute nap before moving on a target. The journey to Rabat had been long with several delays. He had arrived a day late, feeling exhausted. Moving to the small bathroom, Blake gazed back at the bloodshot eyes of the 38-year-old man in the mirror. "I'm getting too old for this shit," he muttered to himself, before splashing water on his face. He had just over an hour to walk less than 30 minutes to a cafe situated on the western side of the bustling city. There he would complete his mission by ending the life of Ahmed al-Masri. Al-Masri was one of the Middle East's richest businessmen. Having inherited his father's company, Ahmed had spent more of his childhood in London and New York than in Cairo. Despite his Western lifestyle, Ahmed had grown to despise the West. Frustrated by various business failures in the States and a fraud investigation that was ongoing in the United Kingdom, al-Masri had become increasingly paranoid. 4 years ago, al-Masri had found himself staring at bankruptcy. To save his company, he had sold off a controlling share to a French tycoon, Pierre Canet. Despite assurances that the company would be managed by Ahmed, Canet had brought in new staff and restructured the company from the ground up. Al-Masri had found himself increasingly sidelined and humiliated. 6 months ago, al-Masri had approached Canet with a proposal to buy back a controlling share of the company through a new group of investors. Canet had demanded almost double what he had paid, claiming that he had massively increased the value of the company through its restructuring. It had been an insult too far. Al-Masri had exploded into a rage, physically assaulting the Frenchman. 2 months ago, Canet's body was found in woods surrounding his mansion. The official cause of death was ruled as suicide. The French police were uninterested in pursuing the death as anything other than a suicide, despite Canet's ex-wife's insistence that he would never kill himself. These were the kinds of power struggles that the killer in the Rabat hotel paid little attention to. Blake rarely read the news or made any attempt to inform himself of the latest world events. He was a ghost, a shell of a human being. Blake opened the zipper on his bag and removed a clear plastic Ziploc bag. He removed the American passport and stared at his own image. The name read Tom Moore. It wasn't his real name, but an alias he had used for years. He wasn't sure there was a real person behind the fake identity anymore. Blake was a tool that used to have a purpose. Now, alone in the dark hotel room, he found himself questioning what all the deaths had achieved. All the men he had stopped from getting back home to their families. The children who would wake up the next morning to find out they would never see their parents again, all because of him. Slipping the passport into his chinos, he put on a clean shirt and regarded himself in the mirror. Setting the timer on his watch for a 40-minute countdown, he removed cash from the bag and placed it in his pocket. Pulling a Velcro panel away, Blake pulled on the grey metal box until the lid slid off. He flicked a switch, causing a red light to start flashing. The device was primed. There was no going back. Retrieving his pistol from the nightstand, Blake slipped it into his belt at the small of his back. Taking a moment to inspect his appearance in the mirror, the assassin was satisfied that there was nothing about him that would make him stand out. The surrounding area of Rabat was swarming with Western tourists. Another slightly sunburned white man would not turn heads. Lifting the bag from the table, Blake carefully inspected the room for anything he might have left behind. Satisfied, he stood in the doorway and took a moment to compose himself. Light from the street cut through the slit in the curtains. His face was half cast in light, half cast in shadow. He closed the door with a satisfying click. The streets of Rabat were lit in a buttery glow. Blake found his nerves on edge. He put this down to having overslept. A glance at his watch revealed that he had 32 minutes to get to the cafe. As he walked down the street, a man tried to stop him with an offer of a discount meal at a nearby restaurant. The trained killer smiled politely and declined the offer, despite the locals' insistence. Having studied the map of the area, Blake knew the best back street route to the cafe and his target. The intel on the job had been very specific about al-Masri's projected time and location. It wasn't Blake's job to ask questions. Questions caused problems. Questions got you killed. If the intel was incorrect, or if something went wrong, there would be time to figure it out afterwards, providing he survived. Blake was good at what he did. Problems were very rarely his fault. He was a professional with a reputation. Not many knew of that reputation, as most who found out about his existence were dead. The evening air was cool, a relief from the humid heat that had suffocated the city only hours before. Blake enjoyed the breeze blowing through his shirt as he turned into a narrow and dark alley. There was the sound of hurried steps on the pavement somewhere behind him. Calmly, Blake slowed his walk, giving his assailant time to catch up. The footsteps were close now. "Hey, motherfucker, give me your money or I'm gonna kill you," threatened the young man in a heavy accent. Blake pushed the clasp that released the knife from his belt. In a well-practiced maneuver, he spun 180 degrees and lunged at the startled mugger. The knife shot out in the darkness and was in and out of the 19-year-old's neck before he was even aware that he had been struck. Satisfied that his assailant offered no further threat, Blake glanced at his watch as the mugger stumbled backward onto the ground. 23 minutes left. In normal circumstances, he might have approached the encounter differently. He might have kicked the kid's ass, or at least hidden the body to buy him time to leave the area. But the alley was dark and Blake doubted it saw much traffic at this time of night. There was the risk that one of the mugger's friends might come looking for him, but Blake's mission was the priority, and he only had a limited window to successfully complete it. In less than an hour from now, the American assassin would be at Saleh Airport waiting to board a flight out of the country. The police in Rabat were not famous for their rapid response. By the time anyone had figured out what had happened, Blake would be on his way to Berlin. As he emerged onto the street, Blake inspected himself for blood. Only his right knife hand glistened red with arterial spray. Pausing for a moment in a doorway, he unzipped the side compartment of the bag he was carrying and removed a pack of tissues. He wiped off the blood and placed the soiled tissues in a plastic bag. Slipping into a narrow side street, Blake stopped at a dumpster and discarded various items he had been traveling with that were no longer useful. Looking down at his watch in the darkness, the glowing digits ticked down. 14 minutes left. Blake strode confidently out into the busy street. The restaurants and cafes were alive with the sound of drunken wealthy tourists talking too loudly. Various street sellers did their best to shift their souvenirs as they wandered along the street. Bored taxi drivers sat in their vehicles waiting to overcharge drunk tourists for the ride back to their hotels. Blake paused a moment as he laid eyes on Café Mazarin. The place sported an open front that was only closed by rolling shutters after closing. The open plan allowed air to circulate through the establishment and offered a clear view of the interior from the street. As Blake strode across the street, the unmistakable portly figure of al-Masri came into view. He was talking animatedly to a man with a mustache who sat across from him. Al-Masri was at the location early and was sat at the wrong table. The briefing had clearly stated that Masri would arrive at 11 p.m. and would take up his usual seat at the back of the cafe. It was not uncommon for details outlined in briefings to be incorrect. But Blake knew he would have to move quickly. Having al-Masri leave early would make his job much more complicated. Blake stepped into the cafe. The smell and noise hit him like a brick wall. He casually walked past al-Masri, who paid him no notice. The establishment was somewhere between a cafe, a restaurant, and a bar. Blake stood at the bar and placed the heavy leather bag on the floor. An attractive young woman behind the counter chatted to a patron. Blake found his gaze lingering on her toned ass. He quickly took in the other people in the cafe. Thankfully, it was not as busy as some of the other bars on the street. Most of those who sat at tables appeared to be locals, except for one elderly French couple. Looking over his shoulder, Blake could see the back of al-Masri only a few feet away. He tried not to think about the innocent people who would be caught up in the explosion. His job was to be the tool, to carry out the briefing to the letter. Thinking about the young barmaid or the elderly couple was a form of asking questions, and once you opened that box, there was no going back. It was not the first time that a hit would kill innocent people, and it would most likely not be the last. The American assassin ordered a drink and watched as the timer on his watch ticked down to 0. The device in the bag now had less than 10 minutes before detonation. Pressing buttons on his Mudmaster watch, he set another timer for 8 minutes. He downed his drink, got up, and placed the leather bag on the bench directly behind al-Masri. Strolling back out onto the street, Blake melted into the rabble of tourists. He quickly found himself in a taxi. His watch read 4 minutes. "I'm late for a flight. If you can get me there ASAP, I'll pay an extra $50, offered Blake. The Moroccan driver gave him a confident thumbs up as he made a U-turn in the street. "No problem, my friend." Moments later, as the taxi merged onto the highway, Blake heard the explosion. The bomb had been small, but large enough to ensure that al-Masri would not walk away alive. The driver looked in his rearview mirror, curious as to the source of the loud bang. Blake pushed a button on his watch, ending the timer, and closed his eyes. He was looking forward to some well-earned rest on his flight to Germany. Chapter 2. The vibration of the watch was followed by a sigh as Blake rolled upright and took a moment at the edge of his hotel bed. His body begged for a few more hours, but discipline was one of the core tenets of the hitman's life. He had little doubt that any softening of his lifestyle would end with him in a body bag. Stretching his arms, he felt a familiar tightness in his left shoulder, the product of a bullet wound sustained many years ago. He reached for the remote and turned on the television. Images of a rally in the US was plastered across the screen. Blake watched the text along the bottom of the screen tick past. Republican candidate Jack Thompson stabbed at Kentucky rally. Blake watched the footage showing Thompson as he walked through a crowd of supporters. He was shaking hands and waving a fist in the air. The 67-year-old had become one of America's most polarizing figures. A movie star, Jack became an American icon during the 1980s, having starred in a series of neo-westerns. The revival of gritty cowboy movies had made the actor a cult hero. While critics at the time had frowned on the violent macho flicks, average Americans had been drawn to the romantic ideals of the frontier and images of a long-lost America. After several crippling political scandals, both Democrats and Republicans were facing a crisis as millions marched through the Capitol demanding change. The existing crop of politicians were voted out as a new wave of firestarters took up government positions, promising to drain the swamp. Little had changed over the last 8 years, and many had lost hope of retaining any faith in American democracy. Thompson had been asked to go on Fox News. The Take was a late-night political debate that promoted itself as a no-nonsense, politically incorrect show where opinionated guests got to speak their minds. The Western icon had caused outrage with various statements about the role of women and the effect of immigrants on American culture. While the political and media class had cried for Thompson to be cancelled, the viewers had found his candid nature charming and relatable. Soon, Thompson had become an authoritative face in the Republican ranks. As various candidates had failed to beat their Democrat opponents, the Republican voters demanded that Thompson stand at the following election. Several major donors to the party withheld funding until a deal with Thompson was made. The aging star finally relented and announced his intention to run for president. Outrage soon swept through the press as the prospect of the offensive cowboy becoming president was met with disdain. Almost immediately, various women came out of the woodwork to announce that Thompson had sexually assaulted them 30 years ago. Claims were made about unpaid taxes from one of his failed production companies. Thompson found himself with a growing list of legal cases against him. Instead of backing down, Thompson only seemed to become fueled by the controversy and doubled down on his more outrageous statements and policies. The voters rallied to his campaign, and soon his speeches were sold out, causing major traffic jams in and around the cities he visited. As Thompson held the outstretched hand of a woman wearing an America First baseball cap, a man emerged from the crowd holding a knife. A security agent spotted the attacker almost immediately, but the speed of the assailant was so violent that by the time he reached out to grab the man's knife arm, it was already on target with Thompson's ribs. Thompson crumpled into the Secret Service men around him as the attacker was tackled to the ground. Gunshots rang out as the presidential candidate was rapidly carried to a nearby black SUV. A reporter on the television said, "Mr. Thompson is said to be in good spirits despite receiving a stab wound to his abdomen." His daughter told reporters that her dad was a fighter and that he'll only come back tougher and more determined to defeat America's enemies. Blake turned off the television. He stared at the floor as he wondered if the America he had grown up in existed anymore. The idea of fighting for his country seemed less important now. What was he fighting for? It seemed to Blake that the most dangerous enemies of his country were not the Russians or Chinese, it was his own fellow Americans. Blake sat in a small internet cafe and placed his coffee down next to the grubby-looking computer monitor in front of him. Waking the screen, he glanced down at the business card he had been given displaying a 6-digit code that would unlock the machine for 15 minutes. After logging into a Yahoo email account, he glanced to his right, ensuring no one was overlooking his monitor. One email sat unread in the inbox. From John Smith. Berlin train station, 90 FG 45LM9. Removing his phone from his jacket pocket, Blake typed the 9-character code into his notes app. The code would open a locker at the Berlin train station. Inside would be a document briefing Blake on his next job. As he logged off, the image of the mugger's face flashed into his mind. His hand pressed against his neck while the blood pumped out between his fingers. The scared look on his face, the fear of knowing he was about to die. Blake ran a hand over his face as he stared down at the floor. He looked up to see a young woman 3 computers down looking back at him, an expression of concern on her face. Blake cleared his throat and reached for the coffee on the desk. His hand shook ever so slightly. It was around his mid-30s when the shakes first started. He had replayed over in his mind a jarring mission in Brazil. Young kids had been in the car when Blake pulled up alongside the black Mercedes and fired a bullet through their father's skull. The screams of the children had haunted him for years. A bus ride to the train station found the American assassin pondering his retirement. What kind of life was there left for a 40-year-old killer? What sort of Tinder profile could he write? Former murderer for hire. Got my shit together. No more killing for me. Looking for a fun single mum who doesn't ask too many questions. The Berlin rain battered the bus as Blake stared out at the grey cityscape. Something had to change. That much was clear to him now. Blake punched the code into the locker and removed a postcard with an address, apartment number, and a time. 2 p.m. Closing the locker, he slipped the postcard into a pocket and left the station. His mind raced as he tried to understand why there had been no briefing note with the assignment. Agents were trained never to ask questions. No matter what the operation was, they were to do as commanded. Go where you are told, and kill who you are told to kill. Normally, Blake would receive intel on who the person was, including information on their background. The briefing outlined important details such as likely times of arrival, daily habits, and car descriptions. Anything that might aid the agent in identifying and eliminating the correct target. The lack of intel suggested this might be a meeting, but those were usually done differently. Blake wondered if it had something to do with events in the States. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he was uneasy about the assignment. Looking at his watch, Blake was irritated at how little time he had been given to get across the city. He could make it, but it was going to be a close call. Wanting to avoid any cameras in buses or taxi drivers being able to identify him, Blake opted to rent one of the many public bicycles. As he cycled through the Berlin back streets, he considered his approach to the address written on the postcard. Something was definitely off about the whole mission. As Blake pedaled, he felt the chain start to slip. Letting the bike roll to a stop, he took a quick look at the rusted and poorly maintained drive chain. Deciding to leave the bike, the assassin set off on foot, jogging at a relaxed pace so as not to draw too much attention to himself. As Blake turned the corner, he was stopped dead in his tracks. A large crowd of people were marching through the street. Various banners proclaimed their intolerance of fascism. The protesters had the street blocked. Pushing through the crowds would be pointless and only serve to reveal his face to 100 people as he made his way through to the other side. Turning back, Blake decided that he would have to go around the block. Sprinting through the streets, he turned the next corner to see the line of protesters still blocking the street. He continued on another block, satisfied that the thinning crowd of protesters was now passable. Slowing his run to a walk, he carefully picked his way through the thinning crowd. A woman with purple hair and a nose ring pushed a flyer into his chest and declared, "Fascists out." Blake took the flyer and pushed on. Breaking free of the protest, he looked at his watch. 2:04 p.m. Taking his phone out, he double-checked his position relative to the address on Google Maps. He sprinted the remaining couple of blocks as the sounds of the protest faded into the distance. Turning onto a residential street, he paused for a moment to take in the cars and people around him. He was looking for anything out of place. A man in a car, a van, a face in a window. Anything that could pose a possible threat. The number 44 on the side of the building told him he had found the meeting place. As Blake took a step forward, he was knocked to the ground by a powerful explosion. A huge fireball ripped through an apartment on the second floor. Blake found his ears ringing as he leaned on a nearby car. Looking up, smoke billowed out of the window as car alarms were set off. Broken glass, pieces of wood, and metal littered the street. Blake looked down at his watch, 2:11 p.m. The sudden realization hit him. The explosion was meant for me. A woman was screaming from somewhere further down the road. Blake turned away quickly, scanning the street for possible assassins looking to finish the job. Various tenants gazed out their windows in shock. Blake put his hands into his bomber jacket and casually strode down the street. Chapter 3. Blake stood in a doorway next to a closed Chinese restaurant. The phone stopped ringing as a familiar voice answered. "Speak." "It was a setup," stated Blake bluntly. There was a pause as the man considered the information. "Meet me at Kruger Park. 30 minutes?" The call was ended before Blake could reply. An uncomfortable sinking feeling was taking hold of him. Everything about this was off. Why was Fletcher in Berlin? It didn't take long for Blake to find his way to the new meeting point, a small park surrounded by multi-story apartment buildings. Blake made sure his approach was obscured to anyone in the park. He slipped into an apartment building, quickly making his way up to the top floor. Peering out the window overlooking the park, he was able to see Fletcher sitting on a bench. The veteran agency man wore a brown coat and black gloves. He looked nervous and irritable as he waited. His handler's glance at one of the buildings across the park caught Blake's attention. It had been more than a casual look up. Blake made his way back onto the street. Jogging his way around the buildings, he found himself approaching the apartment block from an alleyway where dumpsters were pushed up against a wall. Blake pushed on the door, finding it open. He made his way up the dark and damp stairwell. On each landing, he peered out onto the park, trying to get a sense of the viewing angle down toward the meeting spot. Satisfied that what he was looking for would most likely be on the top floor, Blake stood looking at the two doors on either side of him. One read Schultz, the other had no name. The door had chipped paint and looked as if it had been a while since anyone had lived in the apartment. Blake reached into his pocket and removed a device that he slipped into the lock. After a few minutes of carefully maneuvering, the lock clicked open. Stepping into the apartment, Blake removed his pistol from his belt and screwed the suppressor in place. Slowing his breathing, he moved slowly down the hall, listening carefully for any sounds. A faint creak from the living room told him everything he needed to know. The man holding the rifle's eyes went wide as Blake pressed the silencer into his temple. "Fletcher just got you killed," said Blake. "You know how this works. I'm just doing my job. If Black Hawk tells you to eliminate a target, you do it. You don't ask questions. Asking questions leaves you on the wrong end of a rifle scope." Blake had little doubt that the triggerman was telling the truth. Fletcher was the man with the answers. But the very presence of a sniper in the apartment told him the one thing he had dreaded. Black Hawk wanted him dead. Reaching into his jacket, Blake removed a small tack-shaped object that he pressed into the sniper's neck. The assassin tried to react, but it was too late. He turned toward Blake, trying to take up a defensive posture, but the drug was already flowing through his system. He took one step forward and collapsed on the floor. The sedative would leave him unconscious for up to 12 hours. Considering the sniper's build, Blake figured that it would be closer to 10. Removing a few cable ties from his jacket, he bound the sniper's hands and feet. The rifle was quickly dismantled. Blake took a key component from the gun, rendering it useless. Slipping out of the apartment and back into the alley, he threw the rifle part into the dumpster and made his way into the park. "You took your time," said Fletcher, making no effort to hide his irritation. "You'll have to forgive me. Nearly getting blown up has a way of interfering with my schedule." "We have people looking into what went wrong," replied Fletcher. "Is that right? Do you mind telling me what you're doing in Berlin?" Fletcher's eyes narrowed. He was unaccustomed to being questioned by an underling. "That is none of your business," replied Fletcher. His tone made it sound like more of a threat than a statement. "I'm having one of those days. There seem to be a few too many coincidences. And the more I look at it, the harder it gets to pretend that it was an accident." "Calm down, Blake. We will get to the bottom of what went wrong," replied Fletcher, as he broke eye contact. "What's wrong? You expecting some fireworks?" asked Blake. The colour in Fletcher's face drained. "Your sniper friend is taking a nap." Fletcher's hand moved for his gun in his jacket. "We both know you'll be dead before you touch it," said Blake, his cold, hard eyes those of a trained killer. "What do you want?" said Fletcher, forgetting about the gun. "I want to know why my own agency is trying to kill me," replied Blake. "We know." "About what?" "About everything. The bank accounts, the trips to Pakistan and Turkey, the safe houses. We know you're planning a terror attack in the United States. You've been turned. It is over for you," stated Fletcher. Blake's mind reeled as the ground underneath him fell away. He had served his country for years as a model agent. He had sacrificed everything to become the ruthless killing machine Black Hawk had molded him into. "I have no idea what you're talking about. This has to be some kind of setup." Fletcher was unmoved. The veteran spy just pushed his glasses back on his nose. "Come in and we can talk about it," replied Fletcher. "You forget who you're talking to. I know nothing good happens if I come in. If you're blowing up apartments to get rid of me, then there's no discussions to be had. If you run, you're a dead man. You know that." "I'm already a dead man," replied Blake, as he turned his back on his long-time mentor and walked from the park. The taxi driver puffed on his cigarette as the car pulled up in front of a run-down-looking apartment block. Blake gave the man his fare and climbed from the car. The drizzle pattered on a nearby vehicle as the taxi pulled away, and he was left to wonder if this was really the address of one of the world's most prolific hackers. Simon Mitchell had been one of the most brilliant minds in his Oxford computer science class. His future looked bright as corporations around the world looked to headhunt the 24-year-old. Simon, on the other hand, found himself depressed at the prospect of being drawn into the corporate world. The idea of wasting his life making money for shareholders made him want to jump off a bridge. Instead, he had found his true passion, an online group of activist hackers. After several high-profile leaks to the press, the hackers had been ruthlessly hunted down by various intelligence agencies. The leader of the group, Alan Webber, was currently being held in a detention camp on an island in the Pacific. Social media was rife with conspiracy theories about his disappearance. Despite his capture and torture, the 51-year-old hacker had given the CIA nothing. Various other activist hackers had been rounded up, each of them offering little information. The design of the network was such that each node only knew what they needed to in order to deliver on their part of a hacking operation. One such node was Simon Mitchell. If it hadn't been for Blake, he too would be languishing in a far-off detention camp for the rest of his days. Blake wasn't sure why he had broken his orders and given the English hacker a lifeline. Thoughts about leaving Black Hawk had been stewing in his head for a while. More than one of his missions had been to eliminate fellow agents. Blake had found himself questioning the briefings and their claims that the men and women had somehow betrayed their country. Here he was now, the suspect in a supposed terror plot to strike the United States. On the run from Black Hawk, he had spent his adult life serving. In the back of his mind, Blake had considered the possibility of being blacklisted. He had contemplated what his exit strategies would be and had put in place various chess pieces that would give him a fighting chance in the event that Black Hawk turned on him. Simon Mitchell was one of those chess pieces. Blake pulled the small $30 Nokia burner phone from his jacket pocket and dialed the number he had scribbled on a piece of paper. A tinny voice answered. "Yes." "I'm here," replied Blake. "It's number 56. I can see you. I'm 3 doors up from your location." Blake hung up and made his way to the entrance to the apartment block. As he approached the entrance, the buzzer sounded and the lock clicked open. Blake wondered how many covert cameras Mitchell had placed along the street. He understood the way that paranoia could consume your daily life while on the run. Constantly looking over your shoulder, assessing every person in the room as a potential threat. Blake had received specialist psychological training to help deal with the pressures of the job. After years of running trained killers, Black Hawk had pinpointed various psychological issues in their agents. To minimize burnout, they employed a cutting-edge program of psychological conditioning and medication to help improve their agents' performance. Blake had never taken the meds, though he had found some of the psychological techniques to be helpful in reducing anxiety. Blake paused in front of a nondescript blue door. He could hear movement on the other side. The door creaked open to reveal a skinny blonde man with a head that was slightly too large for his body. He sported slicked back thinning hair and a light beard. "Welcome to mi casa," said Simon, as he opened the door. Blake entered and walked down the hall into the living room. The place was a mess. Empty pizza boxes littered a table, while various comic books and action figures covered another. "Sorry about the mess. I wasn't expecting guests. You know the whole enemy of the state thing. I generally don't get out much in fear of being strangled in a toilet," stated Simon, with a cheeky grin. "Can I get you something to drink?" "I'm fine," replied Blake. "All right, what can I do you for? I mean, I'm guessing that you've got some super secret mission you need me to complete, and that you didn't pop over to Hungary just to play some Call of Duty. The organization I work for has blacklisted me. Like you, I am now a wanted man. Wanted in the sense that they want me dead." Simon took a deep breath and nodded his head. "Welcome to the club," he replied, with a half smile. "I talked to my handler. He claimed that I had turned and was planning some kind of terror attack. He referred to bank accounts, safe houses, and trips to Turkey and Pakistan. And are you? I mean, are you planning some attack? I'm not here to judge." "I get it. After years of being used as a killing machine, you finally had enough and snap," said Simon, as he slumped into his gamer chair. "I am not a terrorist. This is some kind of setup. I'm here to ask you to help me find out what's going on. There will be investigation files and evidence on an agency server. I know very few people who could get through the layers of agency security, and I know for a fact that you are one of them." Simon scratched his beard. "I mean, it's not exactly a minor thing just to hack into a US intelligence agency's network. I'll need help and it'll cost you. These guys don't risk their lives for nothing." "I'll wire a 6-figure sum to an account of your choice," replied Blake. Blake held out the crumpled piece of paper that had the street name scribbled on it in blue biro. "Name the price and account details. The money will be wired within 3 days." Simon hesitated, then took the piece of paper. He sighed as he started tapping on his phone. He started to look for a pen in a drawer when Blake held one out. "Thanks. I seem to lose every pen I buy. If they ever demolish this place, I suspect 1,000 pens will be scattered among the rubble." He scribbled down a few numbers and handed it back to the American assassin. "I'll need some time to get everything organized, and there is no guarantee that we'll find anything." "I'm sure you can appreciate that there are no refunds," said Simon. Blake nodded and turned back toward the hall. "You sure you're not up for a quick game?" asked Simon, holding up his PS5 controller. "I'll take a rain check on that." Blake found himself nodding off as he sat on the tram, heading back into the center of Budapest. The rhythmic click of the wheels on the rails soothed him into a dreamlike state. What little sleep he had managed the night before had been haunted by nightmares of a man in black chasing him through the streets of Paris. The American assassin stared out the frosted windows as he remembered his first mission. That morning in Paris would forever be burned into his memory. The surreal mist that had descended on the city now seemed thicker in his dreams. Blake could still feel the cold, hard cobbles under his shoes as he made his way up the hill to 12 Rue de la Montagne. There he had waited in a doorway for Pierre Dillon, a banker who had been helping to finance the Turkish mafia. Blake had waited no more than 10 minutes when the 58-year-old had emerged from his mistress's apartment. The click-clack of his handmade Italian shoes were engraved in his memory. Blake could feel the knife in his hand as if he was still there. Suddenly, Dillon was in front of him. Blake plunged the blade into the banker's throat. He had been surprised at the amount of blood that spurted from the man's neck. The look on Dillon's face as he crumpled to the ground still haunted Blake after all these years. The faces of the various men and women he had killed would often appear to him in his dreams. Blake looked down at his hand to see the tremor was back. Get it together, he thought to himself as he clenched his fist. His daydreaming was brought to an end as he saw a man in a black leather jacket get on the tram and sit 2 rows ahead. Blake wasn't entirely sure why the man had triggered his alarm. There was something about his gait that told him that the guy had a military background. The lack of eye contact was another giveaway. The big man's effort to specifically avoid looking in Blake's direction was all he needed to know. He had to get off the tram and lose his tail. Blake's mind raced, trying to figure out how they had tracked him to Budapest. Some of his fake identities must have been compromised. As the tram rolled to its next stop, Blake got to his feet and shuffled out behind an elderly lady carrying a large shopping bag that threatened to topple her over. Blake set off in the direction of a park, a couple blocks to the west of the tram stop. He turned to see the man in the black leather jacket get off the tram. Breaking into a run, he sprinted for the park. The pretense was over. This was now life and death. Entering the park, Blake looked for a location to ambush his pursuer. Running behind a building that served as a public toilet, he used a nearby tree to propel himself onto the roof. As he lay on the ice-cold tiles, he could hear the crunch of boots on the frozen ground. The man was talking into his earpiece in what Blake presumed was Hungarian. Blake lay still as he heard the man approach the building and enter the toilets. Slowly getting to his feet, he edged toward the entrance and waited. As the man's shaved head reappeared below him, Blake jumped. A pair of boots made contact with the back of the man's head. He crumpled to the ground in a heap. Blake removed the earpiece from the unconscious agent and listened to the man's handler ask something in Hungarian. Throwing the earpiece into a nearby pond, Blake disappeared into the misty streets of Budapest. Chapter 4. The middle-aged waitress placed the bacon and egg muffin down on the table, along with a cup of coffee. "Can I get you anything else?" she asked, in a less than enthusiastic voice. "That's all, thanks," replied Alan Mayer. She gave him a forced smile and headed back behind the counter to serve the various truck drivers who punctuated their route at the diner. He took a bite of his sandwich as his attention drifted to the old CRT bolted to the wall. A news report played images from the day before of a rally held by the president. The text along the bottom of the screen read, "2 critically injured after gunshots fired at President Mason's Austin rally." A slightly overweight female reporter came on screen. Her face was serious as she nodded her head to what her studio colleague was saying. Many are pointing the finger at presidential hopeful Jack Thompson for his rhetoric during his campaign. He has frequently used phrases like, "We're going to take them out," and "enemies of the people." Mayer's attention was drawn away from the TV as a tall blonde man entered the diner, clearly no trucker. The tall German strode toward Mayer's table, his eyes efficiently taking in the room. "I hope you ordered me something," said Bauer. A thin smile cracked across his lips. "Sit down," replied Mayer, unamused. Mayer chewed on his breakfast as he stared the trained killer in the eyes. He enjoyed making those beneath him uncomfortable. Bauer wasn't his type. He preferred his men younger and skinnier. "I have a little problem I need you to clean up," stated Mayer, as he took a sip of the weak coffee. That's my job. I have to say, this is a bit of an unusual briefing. Yeah, well, this is off the books. He's one of our guys. They fucked up his hit, and now you get to sort it out. Maya flicked the lock on his briefcase and removed a couple of sheets of paper from a manila folder. That should be all you need to get you familiar with the target. Blake Reed, Special Operations. Nearly 20 years of service for Blackhawk. He's been turned, and we need him taken care of. Bauer's eyes narrowed as he scanned the papers in front of him. This is Ghost. You want me to kill the Ghost? Mayer stopped chewing and stared back at the German. Blackhawk was an illegal CIA-funded operation created after the fall of the Berlin Wall. The organization was conceived by deep state operatives who desired a way to shape global politics using violence. They needed the best operatives the CIA and military had to offer. Project Adam was created to take young military recruits from US military special operations and mold them into superkillers. In the beginning, Blackhawk was small, consisting of no more than 5 handlers and operatives. After 9/11, it had grown to over 100. In the post-9/11 era, one recruit had risen above all his peers. A ruthless and efficient killing machine, he had been tasked with impossible assignments, always finding a way to complete his objective. That recruit had been a 19-year-old Blake Reed, codename Ghost. How do you know about that codename? I know a lot more than you would like me to know, replied Bauer, with an irritating smirk. You clean this mess up and I'll double your fee, said Meyer. Bauer folded the papers and slipped them into his jacket. He was spotted in Budapest a few days ago, but managed to evade one of the local agents. We're looking into likely contacts he might have in the city. When I know more, I'll pass it on. We believe it is likely that he will return to the States, probably Florida. We're done here, stated Meyer. Bauer got to his feet and strolled from the diner as casually as he had entered. Meyer wiped his fingers on a napkin as he pondered what it would take to eliminate Blackhawk's deadliest weapon. Blake sat on the bench overlooking the white sand. The waves lapped at the edge of the beach as the sun glittered off the sea. He was aware of the man approaching, but did not reach for his gun. The smaller man sat down next to him and opened his backpack. Here you go, said Simon, as he held out a USB stick. Everything we were able to find on the investigation into your alleged terror plot. Blake took the stick and nodded. It's not much, but the investigating agent is Mark Phillips. From the few emails I was able to recover, there is something fishy about the whole thing. The safe houses they claim they found your bomb-making equipment in don't exist. The dates and times of your claimed trips to Pakistan and Iran don't match any flight records from any airlines. It would seem that someone at Blackhawk has made you a fall guy. Any ideas why that would be? I have no idea, replied Blake as he got to his feet. Let me know anything else you can dig up. Where are you going? Asked Simon as Blake turned to walk away. I'm going to introduce myself to Mr. Phillips. Mark Phillips poured himself another glass of whiskey as he listened to a Glenn Miller record play on his vintage turntable. It had been a stressful week, and he needed to unwind. Normally, he would enjoy some time with a rent boy in a cheap motel at times like this, but this was different. Blackhawk was out of control. Their actions had always been illegal and morally dubious. If any one of their operations ever came to light, each and every member would face the death penalty. The shock wave would tear the nation apart as the corruption at the very heart of government was laid bare. Phillips had never planned to find himself at the heart of the deep state. He had once been a passionate patriot. Everyone bleeds red, white, and blue and all that. He took another swig of his whiskey as he looked through his record collection. Slipping a John Coltrane record from its sleeve, he removed the needle from the turntable. A noise caught his attention as he froze in place. The cold, hard edge of the silencer touched the back of his skull. What do you want? Asked Phillips in a meek voice. We need to talk. It had taken them 20 minutes to drive out to the abandoned industrial park. The former fabrication workshop now lay empty and rusting. Various large machines had been left in place, too expensive to remove and dispose of. Strapped to a wobbly wooden chair sat Mark Phillips. His chest heaved as Blake removed his blindfold. You were assigned to investigate me. We both know your job was to set me up. If you want to ever leave this place alive, do not lie to me." "Fuck," muttered Phillips, as tears ran down his face. He was silent as he stared at the ground, trying to weigh his options. "If I talk, you know they're going to kill me," pleaded Phillips. "Correct," replied Blake. "But if you don't answer my questions now, you'll die here. My advice would be to tell me what I need to know, and maybe you might be able to outrun the agents they send to hunt you down." Phillips's head dropped in resignation. "I'm part of a group I never looked to join. I just found myself invited. These aren't the kind of people you say no to. As an agent, you're told that you serve the United States in an unofficial capacity, helping to rid the world of our enemies. That's not true." "What do you mean?" "Black Hawk is an illegal deep state organization. We exist outside of everyone's control. We have people in the CIA, the FBI, and the government. But we don't answer to any of them. They answer to us. We decide elections. We decide who becomes the next head of the UN, who gets to be CEO of an investment bank. We're not all powerful. A lot of the time we apply pressure, make threats, and influence people to make the right choice. And if they don't comply, that's where people like you come in." Blake's jaw clenched as the reality of his service to his country was pulled out from underneath him. "You don't serve America, or the president, or the CIA. You serve the private interests of our group." Blake took a deep breath as he tried to prevent his emotions from clouding his judgment. "So what does any of this have to do with setting me up?" "The group is called the Minutemen, a radical cell that seeks to overthrow the United States government and install a military dictatorship." "You can't be serious." "I know it sounds ridiculous, but you have to understand there is only so much we can do as a Black Ops organization. There is only so much that violence and bribery can achieve. At a certain point, we come up against immovable obstacles. Look at the state of the country. Look at the division and degeneracy you see every single day. You've got the poorest of the poor on one block and the luxury penthouse apartments of the super rich only 2 blocks away. Do you think this is what the founding fathers would have wanted?" Phillips paused and closed his eyes for a moment. Blake stood stoic as he gave the agent a moment to compose himself. "Our plans got leaked by someone within the organization. We found out quickly enough to limit the damage. The leaker is now buried under several tons of concrete near Dallas Airport. The problem we had was that the details of our false flag attack were in the hands of some important people, and they wanted answers. Our plan was simple. We stage a terror attack in the United States. In the hysteria, we use our government operatives to declare a state of national emergency. We bribe politicians to pass new authoritarian laws allowing us to declare martial law. We remove those we cannot control and seize power over the United States, putting an end to this democratic clown show. So, to cover up the details of your plot, you chose me as the fall guy. It had to be someone exceptional. No one was going to buy that some rookie CIA agent could have pulled this off. We would admit to running a few Black Ops agents off the books and sacrifice you as the fall guy. It would explain some of the documents and bank accounts that were leaked. A resignation, perhaps some jail time for a couple of our operatives that would never be served, and the whole thing goes away." The 2 men were silent as both of them considered the reality of the situation. "I want a full list of names of the Minutemen," demanded Blake. "You know I can't do that. I've told you enough already," whined Phillips. "I'm not asking." An ear-bursting bang echoed through the warehouse as the left side of Phillips's skull exploded, tumbling him sideways onto the ground. Blake spun around and charged at the tall blonde figure. Bauer was surprised by the speed of the ghost. Before he could turn his gun on the hitman, he found himself bracing for impact. As the 2 men crumpled to the ground, Bauer tried to bring an elbow down on Blake's head. A stinging blow to his right wrist sent his gun flying from his hand. A counter elbow nearly knocked the German out as he tried to position his legs into a defensive jiu-jitsu posture. With Blake on top, the 2 men grappled with each other. To the German's surprise, Blake had managed to pull a small blade he had concealed in his belt. Bauer trembled as he pushed back against the knife tip, edging closer and closer to his throat. The sound of sirens grew closer. "You hear that?" spat Bauer. Neither of us can afford to be here when they arrive. Bauer's face was bright red as Blake continued to push the blade closer to ending the German's life. What do you say we call it a truce for now? The sound of screeching tires and blaring sirens arriving outside the building caused Blake to blink. Bauer felt the pressure let up as Blake sprung backward. The German staggered to his feet as the ghost grabbed his gun from the floor and disappeared out the back door. As he turned to make his escape, a police officer kicked the front door open. Several uniformed officers stormed the room as they screamed commands at him. A thin, cruel smile crossed Bauer's face as he slowly raised his hands and lowered himself to his knees. Chapter 5. FBI agent Lauren Michaels stood over the body of Mark Phillips. "What are you thinking?" asked her partner, Thomas Brown. "Something about all this doesn't add up. I'm pretty sure that the German gave us a fake name. The identity checks out, but he's got gangland written all over him. He's also got some very powerful friends at the CIA. They've ordered for him to be released into their custody immediately." "This is starting to look like some kind of cover-up," replied Brown. "I've got some contacts within the CIA. Apparently, from what little they've heard, Phillips was involved in some kind of internal investigation. My guess is whatever he found out got him killed. In my experience, these kinds of cases are bad news. The more we poke around, the more likely we are to end up like this poor bastard," said Brown, as he removed his phone from his pocket. "I was talking to the cops that made the arrest. One of them said it seemed like they'd walked in on the perp, like he was in the middle of something. He should have heard them coming a mile away. Why wait so long to escape?" Lauren's question hung in the air as various members of the forensics team worked around the body. "That's the other thing. The police were tipped off by an anonymous source. Clearly, our friend Mr. Kruger wouldn't have called the cops on himself. Phillips was in no state to call anyone as he was blindfolded, gagged, and tied to a chair. No sign of a struggle at his home either," stated Lauren. "So Phillips is assigned to investigate something that the CIA wants to go away. He discovers something that puts someone powerful in a difficult position, so they hire Kruger to take him out." "But someone gets in the way," replied Lauren thoughtfully. "Private security. Maybe Phillips knew his life was in danger, and he had someone at his home protecting him. Maybe they called the cops when they discovered where he'd been taken. The bodyguard and Kruger get into a scrap. Cops arrive. The guy slips out the back and Kruger is caught red-handed. I don't know. We've combed the whole place, and there's no sign of the gun that was used to shoot Phillips. The scene would make more sense if at least one other person was here. But there need to be multiple vehicles here." "We only found Kruger's rental," replied Brown. "Maybe the other person parked further away from the site. A professional might have certain protocols about escape routes, that kind of thing. I need to squeeze my guy in the CIA to see what else he can find out about Phillips's investigation." "You sure that's a good idea? I mean, is it worth ending up like this guy?" Lauren tried not to look at the pieces of brains splattered on the concrete floor as she contemplated whether or not it was worth her life to find out the truth behind Mark Phillips's murder. Reed sat down on the bench and gazed out over the idyllic beach. "How are you finding Florida?" he asked. "It's a lot nicer than my crappy apartment in Budapest." "I could get used to sunshine and beaches," replied Simon, as he leaned back on the bench. "Did you manage to get much on the Minutemen?" asked Blake, as he removed his shades. "Not much, but I got enough. They have code names named after former U.S. presidents. The leader is referred to as Washington. There's Adams and Jefferson. The only one of the three I've been able to identify is Adams." "Who is he?" "Senator Bill Norton. From what little I've been able to read, these guys aren't fucking about. They really are unhinged. The little bits of correspondence I was able to unencrypt was Norton trying to talk Jefferson out of whatever they had planned. He seemed to be getting cold feet, suggesting that the leaks were too much and for them to reconsider going ahead with their plans. Jefferson was none too pleased. "You sure you're up to taking on these people? I mean, you're just one guy," asked Simon, a look of concern on his face. "I don't have a choice. I thought I was serving my country all these years. Turns out I was just a puppet for some power-hungry deep state criminals." If I walk away, they'll hunt me down and kill me. At least this way I might be able to throw a spanner into their plans." Simon nodded, not sure what to say. He had little doubt that Reed's plan to go to war with the Minutemen was a suicide mission. The other thing was the guy who shot Phillips, a German national, Hans Bauer. He's a real piece of work. Former Russian mafia hitman. He's worked for everyone, the Chinese and Iranians. He's been in South America the last few years. From what I can tell, he was involved in some drug operation in Argentina. Interestingly, he's been released from FBI custody. Some powerful folk in both the FBI and CIA made sure of that. "Not sure if they're part of the conspiracy or just influenced by those who are," said Simon. "I wouldn't worry about Bauer. He'd already be dead if it wasn't for the police showing up." "Were you able to find out who called the cops?" "No, I hit a dead end. You need to be careful. Someone is playing you. They're one step ahead. Bauer was waiting for you to move on Phillips." Blake nodded his head. He was not used to being on the back foot. "I suspected as much. I'll move on Norton regardless. He's the only lead we've got." Simon wanted to say something to persuade Reed against his plan, but knew it would be pointless. Instead, he leaned back on the bench and took in the beach. A seagull squawked overhead as he turned to watch Blackhawk's deadliest weapon disappear into the shimmering heat. Agent Thomas Brown rubbed his eyes and took another sip of his whiskey. The hotel bar was open 24 hours. It was currently 2:30 in the morning. Lauren sat down across from him, placing her drink on the table. "I hope this is something good," said a weary Brown. "Take a look at this," replied Lauren, as she removed a manila folder from her handbag and passed it to her partner. "My contact in the CIA managed to get hold of the investigation details. Apparently, Phillips was investigating one of their agents, Blake Reed. There had been a leak about a plot to commit a terror attack in the United States. Reed seems to have been implicated in the plot. You think this Reed might have killed Phillips? Maybe? I'm not sure. But reading through the investigation things don't make sense. I haven't been able to find anything on this Reed guy except his enlistment information. Joined the Navy at age 19. He was recommended for Special Forces training, and then he just disappears from the military record." "Probably some Black Ops bullshit," replied Brown, as he browsed through the papers. "This guy was supposed to have had safe houses and bomb-making facilities. The locations, dates, etc. just seem random. Like someone was pulling this stuff together haphazardly to make it fit together. You think Reed is a fall guy for someone else? Maybe. There is something else going on here. What if Reed was the one that brought Phillips to the warehouse looking for answers? So, why would Kruger be there? I don't buy that a guy like Kruger would be pulling bodyguard duty for a CIA agent," stated Lauren, as she swirled her drink. "You think Phillips told Reed something? The question is, why would they need a fall guy? From what I understand, communications were leaked about a plot to stage a false flag attack. The details were vague, but there's mention of the government declaring a state of emergency and implementing martial law. I mean, why would any of that benefit Reed? Maybe he was working for someone. Maybe this terror plot is just another black operation cooked up by some CIA goofball." "That makes a lot more sense," replied Lauren. "What if once the plan was leaked they had to go into damage control? You can't admit to terrorizing your own population to implement some deranged plot. So you find someone to take the blame. In this case, they pinned it on Reed. This isn't the kind of thing that the CIA is going to bring you in for questioning, so you can poke a load of holes in their lies. They don't need any scrutiny of the truth, so they just have Reed killed. With him dead, the plot is over, and they can clean up the loose ends." Brown leaned back in his seat and dropped the papers on the table. "Maybe Kruger was really there to clean up Phillips, who was a loose end," said Brown. Lauren leaned forward and nodded her head. "It makes more sense, right? The question is Reed still alive, and was he there that night?" One of the cops said Kruger looked surprised and out of breath, like he'd been interrupted. "There was no gun at the scene. Maybe Reed and Kruger had been fighting. Gun gets dropped. Cops arrive. Reed escapes with the murder weapon." "That is very good, Agent Brown," said Lauren, taking another drink. Well, I have been doing this for a while, replied Brown with a smile. What's our next move? I mean, if any of this is right, we are in deep shit. Officially, we tread lightly. And unofficially? Asked Brown. Unofficially, I need to figure out how I track down Reed. How the hell are you going to find a Black Ops agent that technically doesn't even exist? Not to mention, we don't know that he didn't kill Phillips. For all we know, he might actually be the terrorist the CIA claims he is. I don't buy that, and I know you don't either. Phillips was tasked with pinning it on him. My guess is they tried to eliminate Reed and failed. He came after Phillips and Kruger was waiting for him. I have a trump card to play, said Lauren. A trump card? I have a personal contact within the intelligence community. I know he can tell me what I need to know. The cool night air blew through the Jeep as Blake yawned. It was late as he pulled into a gas station just outside Jacksonville. Sitting outside, the former Special Forces operator took in potential threats in the area. A middle-aged guy with a beer gut was filling his Honda with gas, while a homeless man sat with a dog near the entrance. A third person wearing a black hoodie was talking to the homeless man about something. From the body language of Hoodie, Blake guessed that it was not a friendly conversation. Having had enough of whatever abuse Hoodie was giving him, the homeless man got to his feet and walked off. Satisfied with his work, Hoodie swaggered into the gas station. Blake considered waiting in the car until the punk was gone, but figured that at this time of night, this area was likely to spawn a conveyor belt of these assholes. Pushing his way into the store, he caught a glimpse of Hoodie browsing energy drinks in the fridge along the far wall. The young Indian guy behind the counter paid them no attention as he continued to flick through a porno mag. Blake looked at the TV screen that was reporting more of the controversy surrounding the spate of political violence that had swept through the nation. Blake scratched at his stubble as he grabbed a bag of chips and made his way to the cooler. He watched the body language of Hoodie in the corner mirror. The guy was edgy and was looking over his shoulder way too often. He was on something, but his behavior was a little erratic for Blake's liking. Instead of turning the corner which would put him in clear sight of Hoodie, he paused, pretending to look at a selection of pens and highlighters. Hoodie swaggered up to the counter and placed a can of Monster and chewing gum on the counter. The clerk put his magazine under the counter as his eyes went wide. Hoodie had drawn a gun from his waistband and was pointing it straight at his face. "Open the fucking till and put da money in the bag," threatened Hoodie, as he nervously looked out the windows onto the forecourt. The guy who was filling his Honda walked through the door. Glimpsing the gun, he stopped, held his hands up, and promptly walked back out. Blake calmly walked to the drinks fridge and removed a can of Coke. Strolling toward the counter, he placed his chips and drink down, only to be met with a look of contempt from Hoodie. "Da fuck you think you doing, fool? You want me to pop your ass?" threatened Hoodie, as he waved his gun in Blake's face. Blake raised his hands in surrender and took a half step back. "Hurry up or I'm going to end you," snapped Hoodie, as he turned back to the clerk. Blake took his opportunity, firmly grasping the teenager's wrist. He brought his boot down on the robber's knee joint, successfully dislocating it. Hoodie collapsed to the floor screaming. Blake calmly picked the gun up from the floor, only to find it empty, and slipped it into his pocket. The Indian clerk stared at him wide-eyed. "You got working cameras in this place?" asked Blake. No, they are just for show. The wires are not connected to anything." "Show me," demanded Blake. The clerk hesitated for a moment, then opened the back door. He knelt down and grabbed a loose wire dangling under a desk. "C is not connected to anything. We used to have a PC here, but it stopped working, and we never replaced it." "Good. Call the cops and give them a very different description of me. Understand?" The clerk just nodded as he reached for the phone. "I don't think he'll be giving you any more trouble," said Blake, as he placed a 20 on the counter and picked up his items. Chapter 6. Lauren sat on the bench wondering if she really wanted to know the answers to the questions that had been running through her mind for the last few days. She watched as a mother pushed her daughter on a swing and wondered if she would ever be able to look her father in the eye again after today. Special Operations Director, Brian Fletcher took a seat next to her. "Last time we spoke you said you never wanted to see me again," said Fletcher. Lauren felt like she wanted to cry, but she knew the personal issues she had with her father would have to wait. What was at stake was too important to allow her feelings to get in the way. "I need to talk to you about one of your agents." "You know I can't." "It is about Blake Reed. I know about his setup." Brian looked at his daughter dumbfounded. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Don't play dumb with me, Dad." Agent Mark Phillips was found in a warehouse several days ago with a gunshot to the head. He was conducting an internal investigation into a leaked plot to commit a terror attack in the United States. From what I've been able to gather, it's part of a bigger plot to destabilize the US government. You're in over your head. I suggest you forget everything you've told me. And what? Watch our country get taken over by a bunch of deep state fascists. Are you one of them? She looked at her father, a tear in her eye. Brian sighed as he stared at the ground, too ashamed to look at his daughter. I've been aware of a breakaway group for a while. At first, I thought them to be harmless enough, but it seems they are far better funded and have much more powerful connections than I first realized. They call themselves the Minutemen. It's ridiculous, I know. This Reed business I was unaware of. The files I received painted him as a rogue agent. The excuse I was given was that it was above my pay grade and that he was to be eliminated as soon as possible. I knew something about it wasn't quite right, but I went along with it. Questioning orders does not end well in my line of work. Is he still alive? Yes, he managed to survive the initial hit. He knows we are hunting for him. The operation to eliminate Reed has nothing to do with me. There was an awkward silence as father and daughter sat looking out over the park. So you think Reed killed Phillips? Lauren gave her father a rundown of the events and her theory on what she thought might be going on. I hadn't realized how far gone things with the Minutemen were. Do you know who they are? Asked Lauren. No, unfortunately. I know a couple of smaller players who are involved, but they are pawns. The real decision makers are higher up in Black Hawk, the CIA, the military, and the government. I'd like to help bring an end to all this, but we need to be careful. We have one weapon that gives us a fighting chance, replied Lauren. And that is? Asked Fletcher. Blake Reed. Bill Norton's mansion was impressive. The senator had made a small fortune from his years in office. Few cared to ask how a humble senator from Illinois had managed to amass such a large amount of money. Blake wondered why the millionaire hadn't spent more money on better security, but figured that after years of being part of the Minutemen, he no doubt considered himself untouchable. Simon's warning about conducting a one-man war against some of the most powerful men in the world was still fresh in his mind as he slowly made his way up the staircase to the second floor. Holding his silenced pistol at a low ready, Blake moved from room to room. From the intel that Simon had provided, Blake knew that Norton had been divorced for several years. His ex-wife had taken their kids and moved back to Chicago while Bill had remained in Washington. His mansion home was frequented by young models and actresses looking to make powerful connections. Norton enjoyed stringing the young women along, promising to connect them with various people he knew in Hollywood. Only seldom would he ever help any of the girls. Most would be dumped once he had become bored of their company. It had been nearly 5 years since Norton was approached by an individual calling himself George. The man had taken Norton out on a luxury yacht off the coast of Miami along with a bevy of beautiful girls. George had approached him about joining a select group of powerful men who were looking to take back America. Norton didn't care much for America. He was more interested in money and power. George had promised him a seat at the top table. As the true extent of George's plan was laid out, Norton had found himself terrified. These were dangerous men. As he downed his drink, he realized that George's offer was little more than a demand. His refusal would no doubt end in his suicide, a car crash, or whatever other means his assassin would use to cover up his murder. He had been told too much about George's organization and plans for him to simply walk away. Blake pushed open the bedroom door. He paused in the faint light, making its way through the thin curtains. Approaching the bed, he narrowed his eyes as he took in the horrific scene on the bed. Bill Norton's body lay in a strange contorted star shape. His severed head sat atop the body, its eyes closed, the mouth open as if moaning. The room was covered in blood. Before Blake could figure out a plan, he heard the sound of vehicles coming up the driveway. Moving to the window, he could see various black SUVs with flashing lights surround the elaborate water fountain. Figures in body armor holding assault rifles poured from the vehicles. An overweight man with a bullhorn stood amongst the men and started barking out commands. "Reed, come out with your hands up." Blake's mind raced as he considered his escape. He moved quickly to one of the guest bedrooms and peered through the curtains, only to see more vehicles surrounding the property. A helicopter overhead confirmed that the FBI were not taking any chances in capturing the rogue agent. Resigned to his fate, Blake placed his gun down on the hallway table. He walked out the front door with his hands raised, red laser sights dancing on his chest. The small dark interview room felt increasingly claustrophobic as the minutes ticked by. A large round clock hung on the wall. The only sound in the room was its rhythmic tick-tock. Blake leaned back in his chair as he turned the empty paper coffee cup in his hand. The door opened and Agent Lauren Michaels entered the room. "Blake Reed, I've been wanting to talk to you," she said, as she took a seat across from him. "I'm sure you have. This discussion is off the record. Officially, I'm not here, and we never had this discussion. It will be better for both of us that way." Blake glanced at the closed door, realizing that no other agents had followed her into the room. "I need to know. Did you kill Phillips?" "No." "Was it Kruger?" "The German. His name is Hans Bauer. He shot Phillips before I could get all the information I needed." "So you took Phillips there to find out why you had been set up over the Minuteman plot?" Blake's eyes narrowed as he looked at Agent Michaels. "How do you know about that?" "Look, I'm the only thing standing between you and an untimely death. Either you level with me and tell me the truth, or I'll be powerless to help you." Blake had been one step behind the entire time. What little he knew of the plot against him and the Minutemen was too little too late. Now he found himself in custody with little chance of being able to uncover the true extent of the plot or the players behind it. "What do you want from me? Why were you at Norton's home?" "My intel revealed that he was one of the leaders of the Minutemen. I was looking to get the answers that Phillips didn't give me," replied Blake. "But they took care of him before you got there?" asked Lauren. "I've read emails that reveal that Norton was having second thoughts. He felt the leak was too damaging and that they should pull back from whatever plans they had in place. Clearly, whoever is running the show disagrees. They saw an opportunity to remove Norton and myself from the picture. You know, for a super-secret agent, you suck at not getting arrested. What can I say? The events of the last few weeks may have clouded my judgment," replied Blake with a sarcastic smile. "What else do you know?" asked Lauren. "Why should I trust you? Your handler was Brian Fletcher. He's my father. I changed my surname to my mother's maiden name after they got divorced. He didn't know about the setup. He wants to help you get to the bottom of this," replied Lauren. "The problem is we're playing catch-up. They have everything all planned out. We're just pawns in their game, and we're running out of time." Alan Mayer shook the senator's hand and thanked him for coming to see him. As soon as the elevator doors closed, Mayer's fake smile melted from his face, replaced by a sour expression of a man driven by hatred. He walked along the soft carpeted hallway, past his secretary, and entered his office. He paused by the drinks cabinet and poured himself a vodka and tonic. Swirling the glass, he sat at his desk and told Siri to call the German idiot. A nickname that brought a smile to his face. "Bauer," answered the German hitman. "You've got some unfinished business. I'm emailing you the details. A badge and ID will be left in the designated location. We've got Blake Reed in custody, and it is your job to tie up the loose end." "It will be a pleasure to end Reed's life," replied Bauer. "And one more thing, Bauer." Mayer let the silence hang as he took another swig of his drink. "What is that?" "If you fuck this up, you'd best drop off the face of the planet. I don't tolerate failure." Before the German could reply, Mayer ended the call and told Siri to play some Mozart. They were approaching the end game, and Mayer had all the pieces right where he wanted them. Lauren sighed as she reached out toward the bedside table for her phone. Michaels. Some CIA guy showed up out of nowhere with a warrant to see Reed. You said if anyone came asking questions. Lauren hung up the phone before the agent could finish. She was out the door and in her car within minutes. Her decision to find an apartment less than 10 minutes from the office might be the difference between life and death. She burst into the jail reception room and ran past the officers, gun in hand. As the officers on duty shouted for her to stop, she sprinted to Reed's cell. Michaels, what the hell? The officer's words were cut short as both he and Michaels stared into the open cell. On the floor lay the contorted body of Hans Bauer. Blood was smeared along the wall, revealing that he and Blake had been in a life-and-death struggle only moments before. Lauren turned her attention to Blake, who sat exhausted on the bed. "Are you all right?" asked Michaels. "I'll be fine. But this place needs to work on their room service." Chapter 7. Lauren pulled her SUV into the Walmart parking lot and killed the engine. "What the hell do we do now?" she asked, as she gazed out the window. Before Blake could answer, her phone began to ring. Exhausted and on edge, she reluctantly took the call. Blake played over the events of the last few days, trying to piece together a plan that would allow him to get ahead of the Minutemen. After a few minutes, Lauren hung up and turned to Blake. "That was my partner. He did a little digging to see who was so keen to get Bauer released, and he's found out whose signature was on the warrant to allow him into your cell." She paused as if trying to make sense of what she was about to say. "It's Alan Meyer, the director of the CIA," asked Blake. "I knew these guys were in powerful positions, but I'd hoped it wouldn't go all the way to the top of one of the most powerful organizations in the country." "We can't trust anyone in the FBI or CIA," replied Blake. "So where does that leave us?" "You'll have to stay with me. When they find out you've let me go, you'll be as good as dead. What you know is enough for them to put out a hit on you." Blake took a deep breath. He was not comfortable having Lauren's life dependent on the success of his mission. Up until now, he had been coming to terms with the fact that his war with the Minutemen was most likely a suicide mission. His failure to destroy the deep state organization would leave her in a difficult position. "I have a safe house we can stay at for a few nights," said Blake. "Do you have any ideas on what we are going to do about all this? Because this is way above my pay grade. I'm not some super-secret assassin. I'm an FBI agent. I investigate crimes. This is too much." "It'll be okay. You just need some sleep and things will become clearer in the morning. Tomorrow we go to war. We're going to strike at the heart of the CIA." The wood panel room swam in a mist of cigar smoke. The men in the room were angry and irritable. From the highest positions in American society, they had allied together to see their country reborn into something new, something better. Their plans had derailed since the leaks had revealed their grand strategy. Despite damage control, recent events were spiraling out of control. Alan Mayer got to his feet to address the room. "Events have taken an unexpected turn. It seems that Blake Reed and FBI agent Lauren Michaels have gone on the run after killing one of our operatives." "Jesus Christ," snapped Lincoln. "You told us you had affairs in hand. Does having one of Black Hawk's greatest weapons hunt us down sound like you've got it under control?" "They are powerless, on the run, and desperate. Nonetheless, they do possess the potential to make trouble for us. I do not know what they know and what information may have been passed on to others. As such, I suggest that we abandon the Phoenix plan and move to enact Project K," stated Meyer, to grumbles from the room. "You sniveling worm. You've cost us years of work through your incompetence," barked Lincoln. "Enough," interjected Washington. The older man sat at the head of the table, his features cast in shadow, his brooding mood clear to all at the table. "We are where we are. I agree with Jefferson. In order to guarantee our success, we must unfortunately abandon Phoenix and move swiftly to enact Project K. They will be powerless to stop us. Madison, I take it the sleeper cell is in place and ready." "Yes, sir," replied one of the younger men in the room. "Good. Once Madison gives us the go-ahead, I want you all ready to take action. Now pledge your loyalty to the Brotherhood and your country, demanded Washington. A Bible and a folded Revolutionary flag were placed in front of each man. They in turn placed their left hand on the flag and recited the words, "I pledge my loyalty to the Brotherhood and to this great nation." "You may now leave, except you, Jefferson," ordered Washington as the men made their way out of the room. "I want you at the rally." Maya hesitated, unsure what Washington was ordering him to do. "I want you on the podium, to see our victory through to the end." Blake showed his ID to the man at the desk as he referenced the appointment system. "Mr. Mayor's office is on the 4th floor, second door on the right." The man gave Blake his best fake smile. Blake nodded and headed for the elevator. So far, so good. Simon had managed to hack the CIA appointment system, creating a meeting with Mayer for this afternoon. Blake was not so sure that their trick was going to work so well with his secretary, as both she and Blake knew that Mayer always played golf on a Wednesday afternoon and would not be in his office. It would be the ideal time to use one of Simon's tools of the trade to copy all the information contained on his laptop hard drive. Blake stepped into the elevator and pushed the button for the 4th floor, relieved that he was alone. The last thing he needed was someone to look too closely at him or his ID. Blake took a look at the identity card Simon had managed to produce through one of his contacts. Agent Sean Ramos, one of the many fake identities contained on the CIA database for occasions when agents didn't want to use their real names. The irony of using a CIA fake identity to infiltrate their own headquarters brought a smile to Blake's face. As the elevator doors parted, an attractive brunette smiled at Blake as they passed each other. He hoped that she might be Mayer's secretary, giving him uninterrupted access to his office. As he turned into Mayer's reception area, he cursed his luck as a young blonde greeted him. "Hi there, can I help you?" "I need to talk to Director Mayer. I have an appointment." The young woman's brow furrowed as she turned to her computer. "I think you must be mistaken. Mr. Mayer never takes appointments on a Wednesday afternoon." "Perhaps there." She looked up to see Blake's silenced SIG pistol pointing at her face. "Do not scream. Do not move. I see your hands go near a panic button, you die, understand?" Visibly shaking, she nodded her head. "Calm down and open his office door." "I need to get the key from my drawer," she replied in a trembling voice. "Do it slowly so I can see your hands." She retrieved the key and slowly got up from the chair. Her trembling hands made it difficult to put the key in the lock. Finally, they were both inside Mayer's office. Blake removed a small tack-like object from his pocket and pressed it into the back of her neck. She let out a small scream as she reached for the puncture wound and then stumbled onto the ground, passing out within seconds. Blake quickly set about tying up her hands and feet. Retrieving a USB stick from his jacket pocket, he inserted it into Mayer's laptop and hit the power button. Calling Simon, he placed a wireless earbud in one ear. "All right, the device is in, and the computer is booting up." "Nice work." "Did you have much trouble?" asked Simon. "Just the secretary, but she's having a little nap. This will just take a few minutes." Blake took a deep breath as he looked out of the large glass windows that made up two sides of Mayer's luxury office. Something in the reflection caught his eye. A strange red flashing spot was visible on the window. He took a step around the desk to see a small red light under Mayer's desk flashing on and off. "We need to go now." Mayer's secretary must have set off an alarm. "Just a few more seconds. I've almost copied the disk image," replied Simon. Blake could feel beads of sweat running down his brow as he tried to figure out his next move. Voices could be heard down the hall. He checked for a round in his pistol. "Done!" exclaimed Simon. Blake ripped the USB stick from the computer and tucked his pistol back into his waistband. Quickly walking to the reception entrance, he was met by two security agents who were breathing heavily. "Everything okay in here, sir?" Blake gave them a bemused look. "Yes, fine. You should probably talk to the secretary. She's in Mr. Mayer's office." The two men gave each other a puzzled look as they moved toward the office door. Blake reached into his suit jacket pocket and removed a large fat pen that he double-clicked. As the two agents stepped into the room, he gave the last man a firm kick to the back, sending him sprawling into the other agent. Both of them tumbled to the ground, followed by Blake's smoking pen. He flicked the lock on the door and closed it. He could hear muffled curses as the two men tried in vain to resist the gas now filling the room. Calmly, Blake entered the elevator, his heart pounding in his chest. "How are we doing?" asked Simon. "I don't have long." "I'm praying they haven't figured out that it's me they're looking for," replied Blake. "I was able to take down their camera system as we discussed, so they're running blind right now," said Simon. Exiting the elevator, a more audible public alarm had been set off. Blake wasn't sure if this was just part of the security protocol, or if this was the result of his gas pen. Either way, the rabble of office workers filling the hallway provided the perfect cover for him as he slipped out the front door. Jonathan Grant sat in his chair watching television. His microwave dinner was barely edible, but he found a little hot sauce helped to cover up the unpleasant taste. The images on the TV showed violence at another rally. A supporter who was covered in blood explained to the reporter the events of the latest shocking attack. Grant found himself almost aroused at the image of violence, a confusing feeling that he'd never felt in his life before. Having been in and out of mental institutes his whole life, he had managed to hold down various warehouse jobs. He could keep his panic attacks in check as long as he wasn't expected to socialize with anyone, especially women. He had been placed on the sex offenders register after stalking a teenage girl for 6 months. Grant did not need any more of that stress in his life. After being arrested and threatened with serious jail time, Grant had contemplated suicide. That had been until a man in a suit had come to rescue him. The man had explained the serious nature of the charges against him, and that he understood that the whole thing was a big misunderstanding. He knew Grant never meant to rape the girl. He had nodded his head and agreed with everything the man had said. The man had offered him a lifeline, a way out of jail, a safe apartment, and a secure job. He would take care of everything because he was Grant's friend. Grant had stared down at the piece of paper the man had asked him to sign. A small detail, the man had said, just to explain the misunderstanding and to ensure that Grant would agree to go on a little course that would ensure he'd never do anything like that again. Grant had scribbled weird circles on the page, as he'd seen other adults do. He had never quite understood what a signature was, but had watched his mother do it as a child with fascination. He would spend hours mimicking her hand motions, filling notepads in his room. The man had followed through on his promises. Grant found himself being taken to a hospital. At least that was what he was told. He was given injections every morning and made to watch strange movies. A man would ask him to repeat phrases and look at images, asking how he felt about them. He couldn't remember how long he had been there. Time seemed to get fuzzy. After the unpleasantness at the hospital, another man had arranged for the apartment and the warehouse job. Once a month, a woman would visit to make sure everything was okay, that bills were getting paid, and that Grant had everything he needed. She would always ask him the same question. "Do you know what you need to do?" Without hesitation, he would reply, "Yes, I know what I need to do." Satisfied with his answer, the woman would leave the apartment and Grant would find himself alone again. The red phone that sat next to his chair was covered in dust. He wasn't sure why he left it there. No one ever called him. But the idea of it not being there in plain sight started a feeling of panic and anxiety inside him. He was glad it was there. It was comforting. He jumped as the phone rang. It felt deafeningly loud in his ears. He held his hands over them as he moaned. "Phone, phone, phone," he panted as he got to his feet. Turning the volume down on the television, he turned his attention to the ringing phone and lifted the receiver. "Hello." "Jonathan Grant, 15194573, said the almost robotic man's voice. "Jonathan Grant, 734599920, replied Grant, suddenly now calm and collected. "Do you know what you need to do?" asked the man. "Yes, I know what I need to do," replied Grant, all emotion gone from his voice. "Activate now, 15194573, said the man's voice. "You are now active, do you understand?" "Yes, I know what I need to do. I am now active." "Good. Wait for further instructions and start phase 1. "I will await further instructions and start phase 1, repeated Grant. The call ended and Grant felt as if he had just awoken from a dream. He looked at the red receiver in his hand and slowly placed it down on the phone. His chest heaved up as he knelt down next to his bed. The studio apartment was small. Grant preferred it that way. It made it easier to clean and everything was just simpler without all the rooms to confuse him. He felt under the bed and grabbed at the leather handle, pulling the case from under the bed. Picking it up, he placed it gently down on the bed. A thick layer of dust had formed on its surface. Grant found himself tracing those familiar circles he had scribbled on the notepad as a kid. It relaxed him as a smile broke out on his face. He undid the locks and opened the case to reveal a high-powered rifle and scope. Picking up the gun, he held it in his hands, appreciating its reassuring weight. "I know what I need to do." Chapter 8. Blake held his pistol in his right hand as he slowly opened the apartment door. In front of him stood Simon, soaking wet from the downpour outside. Blake gave him a nod and beckoned him inside. "Head on through to the kitchen," said Blake, as he reactivated the alarm system. "What have you found out?" asked Lauren, as she sipped her mug of coffee. Simon sat down at the small circular table, followed by Blake, who placed his phone on the table. "Quite a lot, actually," replied Simon, as he took off his damp jacket. "As usual, most of the data on Mayer's hard drive was encrypted, so I've only been able to decode some of the files. From what I've read, it seems that the Minutemen have greenlit something called Project K." "Project K?" asked Lauren. "It's hard to take in, but it seems to be a plot to assassinate the President of the United States. The K is for Kennedy. Seems these guys have a twisted sense of humor," replied Simon. "Why assassinate the President? They abandoned whatever terror plot Blake was made to take the fall for. From the emails I've read, it seems like they're worried too much of their plans are coming to light with the death of Phillips. Project K is meant to tip the US towards civil war, helping to destabilize the government, allowing them to use their deep state assets to push through emergency laws." "How long do we have?" asked Blake. "Thompson and President Mason both have rallies this weekend. My guess is that we have only a couple of days before the shit hits the fan," replied Simon. "We need to get to Meyer. He's the key to stopping all this," said Lauren. "Any idea where he is?" asked Blake. "Well, that's the odd thing. He's scheduled to be at Thompson's rally this weekend. Apparently, he's overseeing the Secret Service." "That is very odd," replied Blake, as the two men shared a look. "What are you thinking?" asked Lauren. "Meyer is the director of the CIA. Overseeing the Secret Service is not his job. The SS is its own agency. It has nothing to do with the CIA. But what if President Mason is not the target? With everything that has been going on in the last 6 months, Thompson's supporters are at boiling point. I think they know that taking Thompson out would be more explosive than killing the president. Combined with the pure hatred that most of the political establishment has for him, it makes a lot of sense that he's going to be their target," proposed Simon. "We need to be sure if we're going to have any hope of putting a stop to the plot," replied Lauren. "There is one more piece of information I was able to get from the emails. There's a reference to a sleeper cell in Austin. That would point to Thompson's rally this weekend." "My God," replied Lauren. The three of them stood in silence as they contemplated how close the Minutemen were to tipping the nation into all-out civil war. It was Lauren who broke the silence. "What's our plan?" "We go to Austin and we take out the sleeper cell and Meyer," stated Blake. The three fugitives looked at each other, knowing their chances of success were slim. Failure would tip the United States into a period of political violence that would bring about the end of democracy. It was a sunny yet cool day in Austin as crowds of Thompson supporters moved through the streets. Blake, Lauren, and Simon stood at the edge of the park that was quickly filling up for the rally. Pop songs blared out over the tinny audio system as they looked over the area, trying their best to assess where a likely sniper threat would come from. The two obvious vantage points are going to be the rooftop of the industrial building on the west, though it would be a tougher shot, not for an amateur. The office buildings on the east would be easier, but the vantage point is not as high, stated Blake. "I've got the drone, so I can get us eyes over the park. I'll let you know if I pick up anything suspicious," said Simon. Okay, how about I check out the industrial building while you investigate the offices? I figure that's more your area of expertise. Plus, it sounds like the more likely spot for our shooter, suggested Lauren. It's as good a plan as we've got. Remember, once the shooter has been neutralized, we've still got Mayer to locate and deal with. I'll keep an eye out with the drone, replied Simon. Good luck, guys. The three dispersed into the growing crowds around them, each of them crucially aware that by the end of the day, American history would be forever altered. Jonathan Grant tried not to make eye contact with the Hispanic taxi driver as they pulled up near to the park that would host Jack Thompson's Austin rally. He paid the driver and got out, hugging his red gym bag close to his chest. Reaching inside, he fumbled around for the red baseball cap, sporting the words America First. Crowds made him nervous, but his mission was clear in his mind. He tried to see the stage over the growing crowd amassing in the park. There was a sense of relief in knowing that after today, it would all be over. No more being judged, no more loneliness, no more lust and frustration. Today he would be a hero. I know what I need to do. The black Mercedes door was opened by a Secret Service agent. Alan Mayer stepped out. He was less than enthusiastic about Washington's insistence on his presence at the rally. He had grown tired of the Minutemen's leader and his peculiar leadership style. The man seemed to take enjoyment from humiliating his underlings. Mayer saw himself as Washington's successor. As Project K goes into full motion and political turmoil is unleashed, he would have Washington dealt with. The new America had no room for old backward ideas about the Constitution and the Founding Fathers. Mayer had bigger plans for the US as part of a new global government. With the US as the beating heart of the global economy, the entire world would be thrown into turmoil. As Mayer and his allies seized power in the new United States, he would quickly seek to overthrow various states in Europe and East Asia to put in place puppet regimes. Washington's underestimation of his ambition and abilities would cost him his life. One upside of this humiliating assignment was that he would have a front seat to Jack Thompson's assassination, something he and many other Minutemen had been dreaming of for years. A black limo pulled up several cars behind Mayer's and outstepped the aging Hollywood star. The crowd erupted into cheers and chants as Thompson got up onto the bonnet of the limo and pumped a fist into the air. He shouted something Mayer couldn't quite make out as the crowd joined in with Thompson's chant. Fight, 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 fight. Blake moved through the thickening crowd, trying his best to assess any potential shooters in the crowd. He was surprised at how many people carried backpacks. The rally would turn into a pop concert after Thompson's speech, with barbecues and stalls being set up around the area. Many of the rallygoers would make a day of it, drinking beers and partying into the evening. The lack of police was already a red flag that the security for the event was not normal. Blake did not doubt that Mayer and his Minutemen goons would have arranged to have a skeleton crew in place for Thompson's assassination. Blake's earpiece crackled to life. I'm in the industrial unit. It's been a while since this place has been used by anyone. The Secret Service is clearly on vacation on this one. There's no way I should have been able to get in here so easily, said Lauren. Be careful. We don't know the skill set of this sleeper cell. If he is an agent of Black Hawk, then consider him a deadly threat. Shoot to kill, warned Blake, as he continued to search the crowd. You guys aren't going to believe this, but Mayer just walked on stage with a bunch of SS guys, said Simon. I guess he wanted a front row seat for the show, replied Lauren. Just as Blake was giving up hope, he spotted a short, thin man clutching a red gym bag to his chest. The man had caught his attention due to his odd gait and the fact that he appeared to be muttering to himself. He was headed toward the office buildings. With his attention distracted, Blake walked into a tree trunk of a man holding a beer. He shoved Blake backward, an act that would normally trigger the trained killer into automatic defense, most likely ending with the guy's broken arm. But Blake held back, knowing he had a more important mission. Watch where you're going, dumbass, spat the man, as he dared Blake to say something. Blake instead moved out of the drunk man's way and continued toward the office. His target was now out of sight. Lauren Michaels stood at the warehouse's dusty, partially broken windows and tried to get a better look at the stage. She wondered how they were possibly going to find the sleeper cell in the sea of faces now crushed together, ready to hear Thompson's speech. Her earpiece came to life. Heads up, someone just entered the warehouse from the western entrance. I couldn't get a good look at them, reported Simon. Simon, I caught a glimpse of a small guy holding a red gym bag to his chest. He has a slight limp and was heading east toward the office buildings. Can you pick him up on the drone? I've lost sight of him, reported Blake, as he tried his best to navigate through the crowd. Give me a sec, replied Simon, as he tried to maneuver the drone over the office buildings. Got him. He's in the alleyway on the north side of the main building. I think he's unlocking a door. Fuck, muttered Blake, as he barged through several people, tumbling them to the ground. It was now or never. Lauren moved as quietly as possible as she edged into the long-abandoned office space on the second floor. She had been unable to see the person who had entered the building, but was sure she heard their footsteps walking up the stairs. Her heart was pounding in her chest as she considered who might be entering the building at this time. As far as Lauren could work out, it might be one of three possibilities. The first was the sleeper cell, ready to set up their rifle and take out Thompson as he took the stage. The second was a Secret Service agent. She would have no way of knowing if they were part of Project K. For all she knew, they could just be doing their job. She had already decided to assert her FBI credentials and arrest the agent, cuffing them to a radiator until the events of the day had been played out. The last possibility, though far-fetched, was that it might be a Thompson supporter desperate to get a better view of the speech. None of the three were good options. She stood still and listened for any noise that would give away the intruder's location. Before she could react to the sound from behind her, a blinding pain exploded across the back of her skull. Everything went dark. For how long, Lauren was not sure. She opened her eyes to see someone pick her gun up from the floor. I've got Michaels in the warehouse, said the man as he held a finger to his earpiece. She wanted to get up, but her legs felt like jelly. Her vision was still blurry as she tried her best to stay conscious. Understood, replied the agent as he raised his gun and pulled the trigger. Blake ran into the alley and drew his silenced cig. The side entrance door was still unlocked as Blake pushed his way into the building and found himself in a stairwell. He moved silently up the stairs, figuring that the top floor would give the shooter the best vantage point to take out Thompson. His guess was proved correct as he peered through the glass wall to see Grant assembling his rifle. The man appeared to be solely focused on his gun as he repeatedly muttered the words, I know what I need to do. Blake considered the sleeper cell to be a curious choice. He was almost certainly not a Black Hawk asset. He wondered how many more sleepers the Minutemen had positioned around the country as part of their plans. Grant's muttering ceased as he felt the cold, hard metal of the silencer touch the back of his skull. It was the last thing his mind would process before a round destroyed his brain. The assassin's lifeless body crumpled to the ground as Blake looked out over the crowd to see Thompson take the stage to a deafening roar from the crowd. The sleeper is down, reported Blake. Lauren has gone silent, replied Simon. She's not responding. I'll get over there right away. Hang on. You've got Mayer right where you want him. You've got the sleeper's rifle. It's the perfect opportunity to end this right here, right now. Whatever Lauren is facing, she'll have to deal with alone. It'll take you at least 10 minutes to get across the park and through the crowds to even get near the warehouse. Blake looked at the sniper rifle lying at his feet. He had to admit there was a certain poetic justice in using Mayer's own weapon against him. Blake turned off his radio to eliminate any distractions and picked up the rifle, taking a few moments to inspect the condition of the gun and sight. He got himself into position, the barrel poking through the already partially open window. Taking a deep breath, he looked through the sights to see Thompson in the middle of his speech. He was working the crowd into a frenzy as a large screen behind him played a video of a rippling American flag. Unlike the parasites in Washington, I love this country. I love everything that it stands for, and I will not back down in the face of tyranny, barked Thompson. The crowd broke out in cheers of, USA, USA, USA. Blake moved the crosshairs over Mayer. The CIA director could barely contain his contempt for the former Western star. A look of pure hatred oozed from every pore as he watched the presidential hopeful lift an American flag into the air. "We are going to Washington, and we are going to drain the swamp," exclaimed Thompson, as he punched his flag hand in the air. Blake's view of Maya was obscured by the fluttering flag. His finger tensed on the trigger. Blake hesitated a moment and then fired the gun. The round flew across the park, dipping only slightly. The bullet tore a clean hole through the flag and penetrated Maya's skull, taking a large chunk out of his head. There was a bizarre moment of silence as Thompson looked down at his torn flag and then turned to see the crumpled body of Maya. Screams broke out as Secret Service agents swarmed the stage. Blake had already placed the rifle in the hands of Grant and was halfway down the stairs as Thompson was bundled into an SUV and whisked to safety. Blake vanished into the crowd as police sirens descended on the park. Over the coming months, Jack Thompson would achieve a landslide victory in the election. The Minutemen were severely weakened by the events of that day. An inquiry into corruption within the intelligence agencies would result from a series of leaked documents and emails. Agent Lauren Michaels would spend several months in hospital, but would make a full recovery. She would go on to testify at a hearing held behind closed doors. Not only would several Minutemen be identified and arrested, she would also find herself offered a senior job within the CIA. Simon Mitchell would make Florida his new home, quickly getting accustomed to weekend trips to the beach. He smiled every time he walked past the newspaper stand to see the latest headlines about the Black Hawk leaks. As for Blake Reed, few know of his fate. Some within the intelligence community believe he was assassinated in Algeria. Others claim he was the real shooter at Thompson's Austin rally. There are even rumors of him being spotted in Colorado. Whatever his fate, the remaining Minutemen have decided to bide their time until they can rebuild their networks. Reed's actions have simply been viewed as an unfortunate setback. They have not given up their mission, and soon they will have enough chess pieces in place to make their final move. And this time it will be checkmate.